Good day, Thomas Jefferson Hour podcast listeners. And as always, thank you so much for listening.
David, I'm coming off two of the most delightful retreats ever at Lochsaw Lodge west of Missoula. The weather was absolutely perfect. We had two extraordinary groups of people, some of the best discussions we have ever had. The hot springs are just unbelievable. And now there are two already in the works for next year, January 10th through 15th of next year. The first of the two is on J. Robert Oppenheimer, my favorite historical character, and the building of the atomic bomb and the decision to use it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's January 10th through 15th, 2021 at Lochsaw Lodge. And then the second week is January 17th through 22nd, and that's Thoreau's Walden and Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. Two great moments in American literature. Walden, my favorite book, and I think the most important book ever written in this country, and then the greatest poem ever written in the United States, the greatest long poem, certainly, Whitman's Leaves of Grass. So that's the 17th through the 22nd of January, west of Missoula, and January 10th through 15th, J. Robert Oppenheimer. And then in March, date's not quite set yet, our third, John Steinbeck and California retreat. So just great things are happening. We're also going to be going back to France next year, and another trip on the Canal de Midi probably, and Jefferson in Greece coming, and another Jefferson in Virginia coming. So go to the Jefferson Hour site for all of that and more.
I'm so glad that you're doing one on Oppenheimer. I need to read more about him.
I
was going to ask you.
I have
for
an extensive
a
library. I'll bring you books. The best book to read is Kai Bird and William Sherwin's American Prometheus.
We haven't done any Jefferson book clubs this year. Are we doing that this year?
We must. We haven't thought about it.
It's a lot of good
let's
stuff.
do an Oppenheimer book.
That would be a fun thing to do.
We'll do an Oppenheimer book.
Well, we can talk about that after the show. But
yeah, we will do the book club. We'll probably do 5, maybe 6 books. So
I'm excited about the new Rick Atkinson book. We talked a bit about that. The British are coming.
He's got a trilogy about the
World War
Revolution.
II. He's a great writer. Yeah.
And I've never read him, so I'm going to read Rick Atkinson. This is your wife's suggestion, I believe.
Actually, she got the book for me. God bless her.
Oh my!
And there's a couple by Jack Rakovi. One called Original Intent. That might be something.
Yeah. Well, we have some planning to do.
I'm steeped in fiction. I'm rereading Michener's The Source, and I'm just enjoying it so much.
So you could, if you read all of Michener, I would never see you again.
I won't do that.
I had a chance once to work on a Michener project. It didn't work out, but his papers are at Greeley at the University of Colorado at Greeley, Colorado.
Well, you know me,
State.
I rarely read fiction, but his is so accurate historically, and it's an epic book.
He has one on space too.
I've read that. It's
read
very
that.
good book. Yeah,
I've not read that. My father was a big Michener fan, and one of the people he worked with had read all of Michener.
Well, there are those who kind of
lift
lift their eyebrow. Oh, Michener, but I think
Centennial.
He's great.
Arguably his best book. But anyway,
Space was great. I like that book a lot.
So the Jefferson Hour, we need money, of course.
Of course. Is that all we have to say?
Yep. Go into your thing.
No, I don't want to do it this week. I can't.
I'll do it. Let me do it.
You've done it before. You do it better than me.
I can be David Swenson.
Hurts me.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you like the kind of work, if you like the work that we do here at the Jefferson Hour, if you prize what we represent, the clarity we bring to questions, the way in which we tease out the life and quirks and character of Mr. Thomas Jefferson, if you feel that what we do is an important moment of lucidity at a time of confusion and even national chaos, you might wish to support.
That's a worst impersonation of me I've ever heard.
No, it's great. You might wish to support the Thomas Jefferson, and you can do that.
You use words I don't even know what they mean.
You can do that in a whole range of ways. You can send money. You can put us in your will. You can give us your ranch. You can dedicate 1 out of 10 cattle
It'd be
in your
good to
herd
go to
us.
the show before we
You can
lose
send
everybody.
Clay gifts because he loves them so very much.
It's a fun show this week. It always is fun to talk to Jefferson, and I'm glad he's back.
The Space Retreat and the Dickens Retreat were just they sang the song of my life, and now Oppenheimer and
the next time you're in, we're going to get
Whitman.
the actual reviews of your one-man show that is sold out.
Yeah, and I'm bringing the crow in for you to eat, honey, because you sneered and Catherine sneered and they all sneered. It's sold out.
Well, you set yourself up.
And we're doing an album. We're doing an album. Yeah. I love the word album. When's the last time you heard that word? But my daughter said, "What are you, William Shatner in the late years? A Christmas album? Is that where we're headed on this thing?"
Have you heard Shatner's records?
I love Shatner. Yeah, I mean he's the best.
All right, well, let's go to the show, and thank you all very much for listening.
Send money.
We hope you enjoy this week's presentation. Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with President Thomas Jefferson. Mr. Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay Jenkinson. I'm your host, David Swenson, and seated across from me is Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Good to see you, sir.
Good day to you, citizen.
Mr. Jefferson, before we get to our conversation, I must tell you, I believe the last time we spoke, I told you I had ordered seeds for my garden.
I collect my seeds, of course, in small brown packets and try to perpetuate them.
I wanted to ask you about that. Now, mine arrived via post in a little manila envelope, but you had no way of going out and purchasing seeds, did you?
Could do some of that, but mostly seeds were sent to me from around the country and even around the world by other members of what we like to call the Republic of Letters, like-minded people who are interested in fertility and botany and biology and science and so on. And I tried to experiment at the gardens of Monticello with plants that had maybe found their way from South America or from Italy, or for that matter from the upper Missouri, where the ingenious Mandan Indians grew, I think, 13 varieties of corn. They were masters of corn production. They had been at it for centuries, and they had, according to Mr. Lewis, these underground silos, these underground storage caches where they could keep grain for years if necessary. So, yes, I did all of that. It was hard to buy seeds, but the whole idea of seeds, as you know, if you've read your Robinson Crusoe, is that you save seed. You grow a tomato, you save some of those seeds. You grow peas, you save several, and then you use that as your stock for the next gardening season.
I always appreciate when you indulge me in my interest in gardening. I know you share it, sir.
We've already begun to plant for this year at Monticello. I'm guessing out in your Dakota, not so much.
Well, some of us who grow our own plants begin them early indoors, of course, where it's heated.
I had a little greenhouse just off my cabinet, my own study at Monticello, and I could grow or begin to grow things there that then would be transferred out to the garden when the heat got a little stronger.
Yes, I know some of your seeds actually survive. I'll have to look more for them and report in later as to whether or not I find them and how they do in my part of the country.
Nothing pleases me more than gardening. I love books, I love wine, I love musical instruments, I love scientific instruments like octants and sextants and chronometers and barometers and thermometers and so on, but nothing in the world gave me more pleasure than the fruits of the garden.
Well, sir, as I stated, you are here to answer questions from your listeners. And, sir, this week we have a number of audio questions, voices that have been recorded via the phone, so that you can actually hear them in their own voice.
Just the thought that you can record human voice is astonishing to me.
Yes, we could spend an entire episode talking about that, but let's go to the question, if we might, sir.
Hey there, Steve Wall from Norfolk, long-time listener, big fan. So my question is for President Jefferson and to a broader extent for the founders themselves. What would be their guidance or instruction to a senator or congressperson who finds themselves at odds with their constituents? I've thought about this abstractly for a number of years, but I'm realizing that right now it's really timely, since I've got to believe that a lot of the senators on the Republican side of the aisle have to be wrestling with exactly this question. Their hearts and heads might be telling them to vote one way on impeachment, but the realization that vote might be out of step with their constituents and would likely cost them their Senate jobs seems like it's going to keep them from taking such a vote. Would President Jefferson and the founders applaud their fealty to their constituents, Or would they encourage the senator to vote their conscience and accept the political consequences instead? Thanks for the question. Bye.
Interesting question. I can answer it in two different ways. As a representative myself, as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates and later a Virginia congressman in the United States, or as the governor of Virginia, or eventually the vice president or president, I saw my role as listening to my constituents carefully and then weighing what I took to be their will against my own principles, my own vision of this country, trying, of course, to represent them as best as I possibly could, but never betraying my own sacred principles. If I felt strongly about something and I felt that they were in error, or they lacked a full sense of the information available, or they were speaking in some sort of volatile and immediate way and not taking the long-term look at the thing, then I felt incumbent to explain that to them and tell them why I did not think in this instance I could follow their lead. But I think it's essential that the senator or the governor or whatever else she or he may be candid and say, I would like to simply embody what I take to be the decided will of my constituents, but in this case, I feel that I cannot. And then you have to say to your constituents, I know that means you may want to retire me at the next election, and if you do, I will cheerfully withdraw, because you are entitled to have representatives who follow your lead, who embody your will, but I can't in good conscience do that. And so I invite you to either rethink the issue and perhaps agree with me, or if you don't, to retire me. And if you do retire me, I will retreat to private life with great humility and joy, actually, to return to private pursuits rather than the burden of public life. So that's how I saw it as a leader, as a representative. I did say that it's always in our interest in a republic to follow the decided will of the American people. But now let me speak as a citizen, someone looking from Colorado or from some other place at the people that I've chosen to represent me. If they choose to veer from what I think is best for this country, I'm going to vote them out of office. If a majority of people agree with me, that's the end of it. They will be gone after that term. If I'm in the minority and the majority of the constituents in that region support their representative, then I will have to accept that, because we must abide by the principle, and a sacred principle it is, of majority rule. Our system depends upon majority rule. So 51% is, as it were, unanimous for that constituency, for that district. And those who lose that vote can try harder to persuade their fellow citizens that they were right, but they must acquiesce when the majority has spoken.
This, to me, sir, opens another question, if I might follow this line. It's Congress as a career. We have career politicians, people who have served so many terms in Congress. And of course, then that brings up the issue of term limits. How do you feel about that?
You know from our long conversations that I was always wanting to return to private life, that I regard public service as a temporary thing, that people should be reluctant to undertake it. If they're chosen by their fellow citizens to represent them, they should do so as humbly and as thoughtfully as possible. They should retire when they've had a period of service. They should not try to make a career out of it. If they do, they should be repudiated by their constituents. A republic depends upon rapid rotation in office. Nobody's entitled to a career in the Senate or a career in the House or a career in the governor's mansion, and that people who aspire to that are corrupt. That the system was never intended to produce lifelong politicians. It was intended to draft good people from the private sector, from their private lives, ask them, as we do in jury duty, to take on a public trust for a short time, to perform it with as much integrity and good sense as they possibly can bring to it, and then be willing to retire the minute their constituents tire of them, or to want to retire as soon as possible to pursue the true business of human happiness, which is not in the halls of Congress or in the governor's mansion or the Capitol at Virginia. The true happiness of our lives is when we as private citizens pursue our avocations or pursue our professional attachments. The notion that there could be people that would cling to a career in the United States Senate and vote according to preservation at the next election. In other words, to think every issue through about what will not get them diselected, I regard that as fundamentally corrupt. And I would hope that the citizens of any district in this country would punish anyone who seeks to be a careerist.
We're talking about many individuals, Mr. Jefferson, hundreds of individuals, each to his own thoughts. Some people make the choice to run for office, and to quote a congressman I once knew, sometimes events propel them to a more public application of their talents. Again, term limits. Not all people are honorable, as you would be, sir, and they will stay there indefinitely. Should we limit the amount that any one person can serve?
Yes.
We do for a president.
You do now.
Yes, sir.
Not in my time.
Of course.
When I saw the new Constitution in Paris in the autumn of 1787, I had some concerns about it, principally the lack of a Bill of Rights. But another one was that it allowed perpetual re-election of our national officers. You could serve 4 terms in the House of Representatives or 40. You could serve 2 terms as senator or 10. You could be elected president again and again and again and again and again. And here's what I noticed from studying history, that incumbency creates permanence. The constituents sort of shrug their shoulders and perpetuate the incumbent, that they get into a habit of knowing that representative rather than somebody else. Their comfort level is such that even when they're frustrated, they essentially return that person to office. And I worried particularly about the presidency, that if we didn't have strict term limits, that this would eventually create a lifelong tenure as president. Now, you've solved that problem in your time with an amendment that makes that impossible, but it was far from impossible in my time, and I regarded it as one of the greatest single weaknesses. I think 2 terms only for national offices. I even suggested 7-year term for president and non-reelectability, and I even believe that there should be term limits on judicial officers, that life tenure on good behavior is a very serious mistake if we wish to be a republic.
I'd like to speak to you more about this, Mr. Jefferson. We need to take a short break. But when we come back, let's return to this. And I'd like to ask you about the nature of a citizen legislature and the danger in amateur politicians.
Certainly, sir. I have strong views of that question.
We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with President Thomas Jefferson, who has been kind enough this week to answer questions from listeners. And we had an initial question, sir, that we didn't quite get to the end of. And I wanted to hear how you feel about what I would call a citizen legislature, amateur politicians. I mean, do we really want people with little or no public experience in representing us in Congress?
If I had to choose between mere citizens who may not have deep expertise in tax policy or infrastructural questions or foreign policy on the one hand, or careerists who are corrupt, who love their work more than they love this country, who are susceptible to bribery or lobbyists, I would choose the amateur. Take a jury. When someone's being tried for a crime, we assemble a jury of his peers. We don't choose them for their expertise in criminal law or their capacity to sort evidence. We choose them because they are peers. It's almost random. And after a very brief vetting process, they sit in judgment. We trust them. We trust their good sense. We trust their capacity to sort evidence. We trust their capacity to hear lies or to hear evasions. This is sacred to us. It works. I believe that an amateur legislature would be preferable to a career legislature, because I believe that the Creator, God, would have been a pitiful bungler had he designed us for social life and not given us the tools with which to adjust public questions. He gave us two things. He gave us good sense, and even people who are not particularly well educated have good sense, sometimes much better sense than professionals. I once state a moral case to a farmer and a professor. The plowman will get it right 9 times out of the 10, the professor once or twice. So I trust the common sense of average Americans. And secondly, the Creator gave us a moral sense. He implanted in us a moral sense that's as important to us as breathing. It's like our muscles that help us to walk or run or lift things. This is a natural endowment. The Creator was so wise that he gave us a sort of an instinctive sense of right and wrong. So we always know when we're doing wrong, and we always know when we're doing right. We can overcome that by corruption or by self-interest or by greed or by laziness. But almost every human being knows when he is leaving the realm of moral rightness and entering error or crime or sin. That is a gift of the Creator. And if an average legislator has those two things, an instinctive but sure sense of right and wrong and good sense, he will do better than all of the experts in foreign policy that you could possibly bring to bear on these questions. I trust the people.
Let's listen to another question.
Hello, Mr. President. Thank you for being available to enlighten us on your time and history and to answer our questions. I recently was one of the citizens who had a great experience on the Canal du Midi in France under the guidance of a unique scholar who showed us and explained the highlights of your cruise down the canal. I have a two-part question. I know that during your travels you always had your eyes and mind wide open, constantly observing and making notes and analyzing everything you saw in order to take home any methods or techniques, endeavoring to improve something in America or to suggest improvements to the local people. So the first part of my question is, on your 10 days on the canal, did you observe anything about the construction or operation of the canal or the locks that you would use in or suggest to America? And second, did you see anything that the people who constructed or operated the canal could have improved that you would propose to them? I appreciate your visits with us on the Thomas Jefferson Hour, which I listen to on KVPR in Bakersfield, California.
Excellent question. Thank you, sir. Yes. First of all, to the latter question, what did I see in the workings of the canal that I thought might be incorporated in the United States? As perhaps you know, George Washington and I agreed that we needed a Potomac Canal. In the end, it became the Erie Canal that was the gateway to the interior of the country. That seemed wrong to me, partly because it was so distant, and the climate in New York is not as good as the climate in Virginia and Maryland. But Washington and I both thought that a Potomac Canal could be the gateway to the West. We worked hard at this. It was a sort of public-private partnership. We raised money to survey it and do reconnaissance work to see if it were feasible. And then we tried to build the funding so that we could actually create the thing. It did not happen in our lifetime, unfortunately. And then in 1825, the Erie Canal opened in New York, and it displaced the Potomac. And I suppose historians have and engineers have shown that the Erie Canal was probably a better location. It had to overcome fewer mountains and other natural obstacles to get to the Great Lakes. Be that as it may, I observed the canal carefully, the Canal du Midi in southern France, while I was on it. I actually talked with some of the lock keepers and other engineers about ways they could improve some of their systems, which were good, but I think were capable of reform. And then I took extensive notes about gates, about locks, about widths, about depths, about the sort of boats that were best for this and what sort of payloads they could successfully carry along the canal. I even went up to the reservoir which fed the canal in both directions to see what we would need to do by way of that more massive infrastructure as we created a Potomac or any other canal in the United States. This was a time before railroads, when canals were thought to be the key to transporting goods over long distances. So yes, that was extremely fruitful to me. I hope I did not annoy the lock keepers and others when I offered them advice about how they could improve their systems, but I'm just wired that way, and I was very happy to make these sort of minute observations, and I hope that I was able to assist them, because I know that canals require nearly constant upkeep. What did I want to bring back from southern France? A couple of things. First of all, a species of upland rice. That's largely why I went there in the first place, that I had heard that there was a rice strain in northern Italy and southern France which was maybe superior to that which we were growing in the Carolinas. And so I went for that purpose and was able to get some. I had to smuggle it out of Italy, I'm sorry to say, because it was a capital offense. This was industrial espionage. It was regarded as punishable by death to remove the raw rice from that region of Italy. But I did it. I not only hired a muleteer to smuggle a couple of bags of that rice up over the Alps for me, but I put several handsful into my pockets and carried it with me, so that some of it, no matter what happened, would finally reach the United States. I'm sorry to report that the farmers of the Carolinas did not decide to perpetuate that strain of rice. They preferred their own. In that, I think they made a mistake, but I had done my duty. I also brought the olive tree back to the United States. I regard the olive tree as almost a miraculous plant. It provides oil, which can be burned under certain circumstances, and it also provides food. It's a nutritional plant, in addition to providing a really extraordinary source of oil. And it can grow on some very marginal land, which is even more important. So that was something that I brought. And of course, I explored classical ruins and Palladian architecture. And the more time I spent looking at the architectural work of the ancients in Nîmes at the Maison Quarrée, Orange, the Roman Empire extended into France, and the closer to Italy that one was, the more Romanized, Latinized the landscape became. And that part of southern France of Aix-en-Provence and Nîmes and Orange was filled with classical ruins, some of which were magnificent. I remember looking at the Maison Quarrée, which is maybe the most precious morsel we have of antiquity, and bringing its design back to Virginia to serve as the template or the architectural model for the Capitol that still stands in Richmond in your time. So this was one of the richest sensual experiences of my life. The 10 days I spent on the canal were among the happiest of my time in Europe. But as with everything that I did, I was looking for practical applications of improvements in life that could ameliorate the condition of mankind in Virginia, in Maryland, in the Carolinas, and frankly, everywhere on earth where they might take root.
I heard you say, sir, some of your happiest times in Europe, and I can imagine you were in your prime, you were able to learn new things every day, absorb new ideas. It really must have been a wonderful time for you.
I was alone, which is important. I think traveling alone enables one to study in the ways that I did. You sleep when you wish, you nap, you read. The canal is such, traveling at about 3 miles per hour, that I could get out and walk on the towpath. So I wasn't stuck on the boat for this entire period. I'd actually brought my carriage, or my phaeton, this sort of a carriage device that I had, and the top could be removed from the wheels, and I actually had it set on top of one of the canal boats. It had glass windows, so I could sit in it and read and write. And then if I became restless, I could get off the boat and walk on the towpath for as long as I pleased. The nightingales were singing. Their song is exquisite. They were truly happy days, and all of that time I'm restlessly making notes about how America can be a more efficient place, our transportation system better, how canals might be the key to our control of the American West and our peopling of the American West, new crops that we might wish to incorporate into the husbandry of the United States, and then, of course, classical architecture, which is superior to anything that came before or since in the history of the world.
I have another question for you. This one concerns Mr. Adams.
Yes, President Jefferson, enjoying your show. I was wondering if you could have a show on your relationship with John Adams. I see that John Adams was the only founding father who did not own a slave. Do you have any comments on that? Thank you very much.
I'm glad that Mr. Adams did not own slaves. He was fortunate in that he lived in New England, where there had been a bit of slavery, but never much, and it was easier for New England to get out from under that horrible practice than it was for any of the states, Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. John Adams was one of the most extraordinary men of the American Revolution. His integrity was absolute. I know of no character amongst the founding generation whose integrity was as unassailable as that of John Adams. You paid a price for that because there was a righteousness sometimes in Adams, and he had a kind of crabby, irascible personality, but his virtue was extreme. And I loved him. I had many friends. James Madison was my closest friend. James Monroe and I were close. I had friends in every direction, but I had a special relationship with Adams. There was some deep mutual affection and respect that survived a great deal of tension. I was a friend of the French Revolution. He regarded it as a nightmare. I like a little rebellion now and then. He was appalled by Shays' Rebellion and every other form of anarchy or rebelliousness that he saw after the creation of the Constitution of the United States. I'm a Unitarian. He eventually became a sort of deist, but he was always a little shocked by my religious sensibilities. He believed that government should be controlled by an elite, by the best educated people of the country, that democracy or even anything approaching it was dangerous business, that the people, because they were beset by human nature, could not really be trusted to show virtue in governing themselves. He wanted more government rather than less, and so on. We disagreed about a whole range of subjects, and then when we became competitors for public office in a certain sense, each of us did things, or our lieutenants did things that damaged the friendship. And I will say in candor that I did more to damage my friendship with John Adams than he ever did to damage me. I take historical responsibility for that, and he did not let me forget it, by the way, nor did his wife Abigail. But in the end, after we both had safely departed from the presidential chair, we were brought back into communication by our friend Benjamin Rush, and that brought forth a correspondence of well more than 100 exchanges, which turned out to be one of the great solaces of our lives as elderly men, and helped us to explain each other and to explain the American Revolution to posterity. So things turned out very well indeed, and I believe that in the end, as you perhaps know, we died on the same day, on the 4th of July, 1826. I believe that at that point there was a very deep affection and mutual harmony between John Adams of Massachusetts and me of Virginia.
It's a fascinating relationship. Of course, as you know, your letters have since come into the public realm, sir, the correspondence between you and Mr. Adams at the end of your lives. And it's easy to stereotype your relationship by saying the two of you brought the best out of each other. But there's some truth to that, is there not?
In his fourth or fifth letter in that series after 1812, John Adams said, "We must not die until we have explained ourselves to each other." And he challenged me to not only explain my views and my policies as president. He actually said that I had been a relatively weak president. He said that to me, by the way. But he also helped me to clarify these things because my life had happened as all lives happened. Event A, crisis B, this office, that office, difficulties at home, the births and deaths of children and grandchildren and so on. We live our lives and we don't have many chances to step back and synthesize and reflect and to try to find the areas of consistency and the areas of paradox. That correspondence invited me, I almost said forced, invited me to step back and to try to make sense of a very long career in public life. And, I'd lived through the American Revolution and the great explosion of population in America and the French Revolution and the difficulties of the War of 1812 and economic crises, both personal ones and national and international ones. So there have been many cataclysmic events in the course of my life. And the challenge that Adams put to me in those late letters asked me to step back and to try to make sense of it all. So I owe him a great deal for that. I don't know that I changed his mind much or that he changed my mind much, but each of us made some conciliations. We each accepted the other's point of view more than we did during those high moments of tension in 1800 or 1798.
You said, sir, that he challenged you. Most certainly, you challenged him undoubtedly to the point of frustration more than once.
Well, I can speak from my own experience. He asked me if I really believed that the French Revolution would end in harmony and happiness, and I had to say to him, "You were right. I was wrong. In fact, it's worse than even you said. I got the end of the French Revolution wrong." And he asked me about some of the policies of my administration, including the embargo acts and so on. And I didn't exactly admit that I had been wrong, but I acknowledged that there was a point of view that he held that I knew was a good faith point of view. And when you get criticism in good faith from someone who cares for you and respects you, it's always in your interest to take that very seriously. But I challenged him by saying, there's reason to be more optimistic about the American project than he often was. And I don't know if he agreed, but he at least listened.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jefferson. I've enjoyed this conversation.
I have too, sir.
We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm out of character now, safely in my own North Dakota sort of clothing here in the barn.
It was great to have all those audio questions from listeners, and Mr. Jefferson accepted them without flinching.
Please send more audio questions. Just go to the Jefferson Hour website, and it's easy enough to do. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. That was Roger from the Canal de Midi trip who asked about the canal. He and his wife Karen were on that extraordinarily joyful journey where we spent, I think, 6 days on the canal that was so important to Mr. Jefferson. I'm sitting across from the semi-permanent guest host of the Thomas Jefferson
You know
Hour.
it's official because I have my plaque.
And that was sent to you by, someone who thinks that you don't get enough credit.
Oh, geez.
Here we go. Yeah, I got no plaque,
got to
but
make
that's
personal
fine.
friends with whoever that was.
That's
for sure.
fine.
I like it.
And I want to tell you a story. This is the greatest story.
Why am I worried?
No, listen, you're going to love this.
Okay, great.
You're going to love this. So I got to Lochsaw Lodge to do the space retreat. We do these annual winter retreats, and one was on Dickens this year, and the other one was on space.
Right.
And there was a package waiting for me.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't know what it was in. I opened it up, and there were 2 spectacular Lego kits.
Oh.
One for
Legos.
the Saturn V,
Uh-huh.
the great rocket that was made by Wernher von Braun that took us to the moon.
Are you going to leave me a space to brag about my nephew sometime later? Okay.
And the other one was the Lunar Excursion Module, the LEM. And this wonderful man from Seattle said in a letter that he included that he and his son would have loved to have come to the space retreat, but they just couldn't this year. That they had built some Lego rockets of this sort, and they wanted me to have them. And they sent these marvelous, beautiful Lego packages, and I encouraged the people at the retreat to help put them together, and we did. And it was so interesting because it became a humanities project, David, as they were doing this. They're very intricate. They have interiors and exteriors and things you can't see but are still authentic. they would be talking about thrusters and throw weights and how the command module was built and the service module and what it took for Wernher von Braun to build this extraordinary rocket. And so the commentary in itself, and I just want to thank that Jefferson Hour listener for really one of the great gifts one of the most thoughtful gifts that I have ever received in my life. And they built it. I have them now. It's in my living room. I'm going to take a photograph to send to him and his son. I even ordered the glue you can get in the spray can that kind of holds the Legos together so they don't just fall apart.
Yeah.
But I have a Saturn 1B model that was sent to me by my friend Joey King. It's not a Lego. And then next to it now is this towering Saturn V. The original was higher.
Legos, right?
Yeah, and you have a nephew.
Well, the story is that years ago, you and I went to New York
to interview Dan Rather.
Yeah, and several other notables. And while we were there, we visited my nephew, Nathan Sawaya, and he took us over to his studio. Nathan was a lawyer, didn't really like practicing law, entered a contest, a Lego building contest, and won. And within a couple of years had given up his law practice and left and became a full-time Lego artist. And now is like world-renowned. He's had exhibits.
He did the Stephen Colbert Lego. I mean,
but he's
Statue of Liberty Legos.
He's had legit art exhibits all over the world. And
does he approve of the new Lego series on television?
Well, actually, he's a technical advisor. So
I have not seen it.
I read an interview. It's not on. It's coming. Well, by the time this airs, it may be on.
And his name is Nathan.
Nathan Sawaya.
I just want to challenge him. We need a Lego Jefferson for here in the barn.
He's got a website, brickartist.com, and he has a great book. I think I gave you a copy, The Art of the Brick.
But don't you think a Lego Jefferson would be appropriate?
Well, why don't I call him and see if he would come on and you could talk to him about that.
Sure, because it's like $8,000 worth of bricks.
Probably more than that. Yeah. Anyway, so there's the Lego segment of the show.
But don't you think what a marvelous gift from this friend of the Jefferson Hour from Seattle? I mean, it was. I'm not joking. That I didn't ask for that, but that changed the course of the retreat.
Oh, when you told me about it, I could see the glee in your eyes.
And then they made me hold it up on the last night to take a picture. And
that's why you got the glue.
lem fell.
Yeah.
And the whole thing shattered, and it took the engineers another 2 or 3 hours to put it back together. I was shamed. I was universally shamed by the people at the dinner table.
So we talked to Jefferson this week, and we kind of ended up with Adams, and I always enjoy
my favorite relationship of all of Jefferson's.
Right, yeah. And the one thing I didn't get to present to President Jefferson, we talked about how they inspired each other and sort of a yin-yang, kind of brought the best in each other out, but the question for me always comes to faith in people, which, hardcore, it's, Jefferson believed in the people, infallible. And Adams said, to quote you, what are you, nuts?
Have you met some of them?
Yeah. But I don't think either of them were quite that stringent. There was a middle ground that they were closer to.
We stake out our positions.
Right.
And then we try not to
Thank you.
To incorporate the parts that don't fit. So each one of them was closer to the center than they admitted.
It's always fun to talk about the two of them. We've done a number of shows. The collection of letters. In fact, you gave me generously a copy of that.
Lester Cappan's one-volume edition.
Yep.
So you think of one of the greatest icons or archetypes in Western civilization is Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Don Quixote is this unrealistic idealist, kind of not really of this world, but magnificent in his love of humankind and his sense of gallantry and chivalry. And Don Quixote's pal, Pancho Sanza, is always saying, "Oh, come on, that's not a dragon, that's a windmill, and that's not a helmet, that's a wash basin," and so on. And Dulcinea is just a wench. She's not a princess. This is one of the great iconic archetypes of culture, that there's the idealist and the realist. Adams was that person for Jefferson. He's like, I'm with you. I want to live in a republic. I want to believe in people. I want us to be unusual and maybe unique.
I want to believe it's a dragon.
Yeah, but you know what? It's not. And he keeps saying to Jefferson, as as carefully as he can or as forcefully as he must, if you don't face the world as it actually is, you're going to legislate damage, because you have to factor in selfishness and ignorance and habit and class consciousness. He said the basic human urge is the urge for distinction. You can't educate that out of people. And Mr. Jefferson, if you'll just acknowledge that, we can work together to build a republic. But if you're going to just say man is born good and he's capable of indefinite perfectibility and that you trust the people on all occasions, that is lovely, but it just won't work, my friend.
Yeah, but that would be the brick that you would take out of Jefferson's wall that would cause so much collapse. I don't know if he would survive it.
And we as a people need Jefferson. That's my whole point. I've been doing this
we
now
need
for
those
decades.
Believers, right?
We have to have the dreamer. We have to have the person who says that we can make this work. You know, when I hear a politician say the best of America is ahead of us, that gets me every time.
It rings in my ears. I've heard you say that before. The ones who win are those who have learned to sing the song of Jefferson.
And
we haven't heard one yet.
Jefferson
We're waiting.
Did it. All the best do it. And God bless him. Donald Trump did it too in a kind of a cracked way. But he's saying, I'm going to make America great again. And that sense of optimism, whatever the coding of it might be.
Shining city on a hill.
Reagan. Those statements that America is unique in the world's history and that we have a destiny that we have not yet fully achieved and we're going to have to suck it up and get there, that works almost every time.
It's what people want. They want to be led to a better place, don't you think, in general?
And I will tell you this, and I hope everyone is listening, I so want to love this country again and believe that we're still on that trajectory.
Yeah, but you're getting a little radical there.
I am. I so want to believe in this country again. And it's not just the current executive. That's not it at all. I am largely disillusioned and even ashamed of where we are at this point. We're better than this. It's what H.W. Bush used to say. We're America. We're America. David, that is one of the most beautiful and resonant words in any language in the world.
What a great place to end this week's conversation, and I thank you for it, sir, and I thank President Jefferson as well. But now, sir, it is time for this week's Jefferson Watch.
I've been writing recently about the ways in which I'm being radicalized by the collapse of American civilization. I no longer think we need only to undertake a few thoughtful reforms in order to save the country. The colossal farce of the Trump impeachment, wherein the most important material witness to the central allegation in the articles of impeachment was not called as a witness. The vast, now infinite disparity between the lives of the super-rich who own most of the wealth of America and the tens of millions of good and decent people who live paycheck to paycheck and in some cases meal to meal. The ways in which we are impairing the planet's basic capacity to support life with the destruction of the Amazon rainforest, the world's lungs, and the blinking out of hundreds of species per year so that we can store our nutrition-free soft drinks in use once and throw in the ocean plastic containers. The myriad ways that America, now the world's only superpower, ignores the plight of the Kurds, the Syrians, the Palestinians, the Rwandans, while keeping the shipping lanes open for oil tankers and Walmart ships. All this has radicalized me. We know too much now, because of the proliferation of amazing and well-researched books about every troubled zip code in the world. We get to see Australia and California burning in high-definition home theaters. We watch, sometimes in real time, when our drones accidentally explode a wedding party in Afghanistan while trying to assassinate an Islamic jihadist. We have to choose to be ignorant now, to turn away deliberately from the implications and the cost of our way of life, because if we actually stared the dark underside of American life in the face, we would have to do something about it or just give up and shout, "Drill, baby, drill." Maybe I've been living with Thomas Jefferson too long, but I find myself gravitating more and more towards revolutionary doctrines and less to his dumbwaiters and skylights and library classification systems. Here's a local example. In the last couple of years, a North Dakota rancher and industrial trucker threw up a bridge across the sacred Little Missouri River in McKenzie County without bothering to get permits from the U.S. government or even the county in which he built the bridge. He just did it, I suppose on the principle that it's easier to ask forgiveness than to get permission. There aren't many bridges on the Little Missouri River in the fabulous North Dakota Badlands, because this is one of the most sparsely populated places in North America, and because we should do everything in our power to save North Dakota's most beautiful and stark landscapes from routine industrialization and extraction. But this very wealthy fellow wanted a bridge to make his life richer and more convenient, so he just had one built, partly on federal property. When this crime was discovered by my friend Jim Fugely, who began his journalistic career as a sports editor and is ending it by writing some of the most important investigative journalism in North Dakota life, federal and state agencies, who were blissfully unaware that a bridge had been thrown up in North Dakota under their noses, and they weren't even aware of it, they wrung their hands and growled and grumbled for a while, and then, of course, merely slapped the culprit's hands and told him that he had done an irresponsible thing. But the bridge remains. I believe the bridge must be demolished, carefully and at the rascal's expense, and that he should pay a very large fine, one that bites into the millions he has extracted from the Bakken oil boom, and frankly, I believe he should go to prison. I'm serious. As President Bush Sr. said when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait back in 1991, this must not stand. The late Edward Abbey invented the phrase monkey wrenching, and he probably would have advocated blowing up that bridge as a public service. I would not undertake that, of course, and I would condemn it if it happened, probably, though it would be a pretty cool final career move for someone who takes Thomas Jefferson seriously. It was Jefferson, after all, who said, "I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical." And he wrote, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." My demolition plan wouldn't shed any blood unless I managed to hoist myself with my own petard along the banks of the Little Missouri River, which was not unlikely, given my fairly limited experience with dangerous explosives. I can see myself enjoying some time in federal prison, actually, as long as it was club-fed, so long as I was permitted to read all the books that have been piling up in my house over the last 10 years. I would smuggle my manifesto out of prison on little squares of toilet paper, and I'd hereafter be known as that moron who blew up the bridge. In a few days, I will be going to Cuba with a group of Jefferson Hour listeners. This is my first trip to Cuba, and though I know a fair amount about Theodore Roosevelt and San Juan Hill, about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I have read Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, I don't really know much about the Cuban Revolution of the late 1950s, except that Fidel Castro managed to drive American policymakers crazy, actually bonkers, and the Kennedys spent years trying to assassinate him, Operation Mongoose, including a scheme to somehow put exploding cigars into his hands. That makes my Little Missouri Bridge scheme look positively rational. It's at least possible that the Kennedys' fixation on ridding the world of Fidel Castro blew back on November 22, 1963, in Dealey Plaza in Dallas. I have been reading books on this subject, including an excellent one-volume account of the revolution entitled Cuba Libre by Tony Peritet. What I have discovered is that Castro and his co-revolutionary Che Guevara were very much more interesting than I had ever thought. I find myself on Castro's side. I believe he was a serious idealist and freedom fighter, particularly at the beginning. He believed that he was acting in the same spirit as the Green Mountain Boys of Vermont, the Sons of Liberty, the Minutemen, and the Worthies of 1776, including Senor Jefferson. And why, I keep asking, does the United States invariably support corrupt, rapacious, appalling thugs like the Cuban strongman Fulgencio Batista? The answer is simple: to protect extractive corporate capitalism of the sort practiced then and now by mining companies and the United Fruit Company. I will be visiting Castro and Che sites in Cuba. I have even considered ordering a beret. Don't get me wrong, I know that Castro was no saint, but the revolution he undertook, against almost impossible odds, was both right and righteous, In addition to which, we drove him into the hands of Khrushchev and the USSR when his natural affinity was not with communism at all. And for 71 years we have done what we can to make sure that the Cuban Revolution fails. Still, given my increasing radicalism, you may never hear from me again. I might throw away my silly historical costumes and disappear into the Sierra Maestra Mountains where the Cuban Revolution began. Call me Clay Guevara. Or perhaps I will be arrested in Miami for smuggling authentic Cuban cigars into the United States. Only time will tell. I'm Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you next week for another exciting edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any show for a $12 donation, please call 701-575-0727. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson.